was a good move, right? They brought a lefty in. And stuff on the road. It was just like, it was the first time I ever hopped on a because your dad was dancing in the gym. Because it made it 42 game 8-2.
Cal, did you play in the Monroe League back in the day too? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
You guys ready? 3 home runs in 4 games, he told me.
Bernie Cup. For you, it was a wise choice to after the career that he had in the Montclair League. It was a good choice by Bernie.
We're down in the cellar here at Shore Brewery that now was formerly John's and then JV's and now it's Happy Hour Sports Bar. And this is for a Monroe County Baseball Legends podcast, if you will. It's being videotaped and it'll be available to listen to and watch. My name's Kyle Bittner. They just asked me to get this thing kicked off, and then these guys are going to tell all the stories and everything. And if you guys want to go around the table and introduce yourself.
Paul Eilbracht.
Mark Ludwig.
Cal Neeman.
Brad Rippelmeyer.
All 4 of these guys did play on the Montclair League, and they all had fathers that were pretty influential in baseball, also at the professional level and at the local level also. If you guys want to talk about how long, I mean, Brad, you were in the major leagues for many years, and everybody else here played.
Minor leagues, yeah.
Well,
I never made it to majors.
Professional baseball.
Yeah.
Yes.
College, mainly professional baseball for me.
I played 1 year in college as a walk-on and 13 years in the Montclair League.
Yeah, I played at Southeast Missouri for 4 years, and then I played 18 years with the Buds in Montclair League.
Did you guys all play together in the Montclair League, or it was all different times?
Go ahead. Were you guys
I
around the
think
same
Mark
time?
and I
We're
played against
contemporaries.
each other in a few games the other ones were a little bit younger.
I think
Yeah,
Brad
Clay-
had just started.
Clay and I played together in Legion Ball and played against each other in the Montclair League. Yes.
You would have started in the Montclair League about 85, right? In high school.
My first year kind of sitting on the bench or being on the team was around that time.
Because
Yeah.
I remember you were.
Yeah.
I said, there's this kid named Rippelmeyer.
I was a kid. I was not shaving yet, that's for sure.
And my first hit in the league was the last year you played, 85.
You guys want to talk about what got you into baseball, I guess, if you will? I mean, I think it's a pretty much a family affair for everyone, right? I mean, obviously, your dad, Vern, was the manager for, I don't even know, 40-something.
60.
2 years.
Yeah, 29 titles in a row or something, or?
Close.
Yeah.
Well, my dad played second base for whatever they were called back then, the Warriors, the Buds. And in 1952, Bernie took over at second base. And then Bernie's been managing in 60. And I think Dad hung around and played as a pinch hitter for about 4 or 5 years, up to about 57. So that's the connection there. So then Bernie was there till last year.
People have asked, about our family and playing sports before, and I kiddingly say my dad wanted me to be a chemical engineer, but he said I better keep playing ball. So I hung around. I got the opportunity, when I was really young, early teens, maybe even before then. My dad was playing then in the Montclair League, and there was a lot of players that were out there that were always really very good, and he kind of said, "Hey, model yourselves after them," and kind of give them a shout out. They've passed away, but one was Bucky Jacobs, and the other was Johnny Wyatt. Then my dad was playing then too, and Eddie Albrecht was one of the pitchers that was there. So I kind of, coming from a MLB player, family, the balls are always laying around the house and you're doing something, so you kind of catch on to it that way. But it was just a normal progression that we would play. It was what we did as a family.
Yeah, my dad, when I was born, Dad was named the pitching coach for the Phillies in the big leagues. So my earliest memories are going to Philadelphia and going to the clubhouse, and he was the pitching coach up until I was 8 years old. So my earliest memories are that was just our life. We packed up every summer, went to Philadelphia, and I was in the big league clubhouse around big league guys and did that kind of thing and really didn't know any different until he retired for the first time and we came home. And then I had a very normal, what I would call normal childhood. After that, I lived on the farm and played baseball in the summer like most kids did. And there was certainly no big league lifestyle anymore, but but I knew of, obviously, of Dad's background and that kind of thing. But yeah, kind of like Cal said, just didn't know anything else than every time the weather got nice in the spring, I was going to start playing ball. So.
And I think the Montclair League is pretty well known for being a more competitive league than most of them around the Midwest. You know, it's not your typical beer league. There was a lot more talent involved. How did that come about? Why did that league start so strong and stay so strong? Or was it a product of some of your fathers managing and bringing those players in, or did that just happen by accident?
I know Dad in his early years talked about how many great players were in Monroe County and coming home and playing in the league. And, you know, just from the very beginning, and how popular it was. He talked about, you know, how many people would show up for the games on Sundays, community would be out, you know, and thinking about how many teams were just in Monroe County at different times.
Yeah.
Merrimack, Harrisonville had a team for a while. Fultz had a team.
Reno,
St. Glory.
Yeah, I mean,
so it was, you know, there were a lot of quality players in the area and a lot of people that love baseball in the area, and so I think that combination.
yeah, I think so
fostered a
too.
great league.
I think so too.
Well, it got good coverage in the local papers. I mean, I grew up, I was never going to go beyond amateur ball. I wasn't big, I wasn't fast, I didn't have an arm. I wanted to play for the Bucks.
Yeah.
You know, when I got the call, I was like, yeah, I'll play. You know?
Well, I tell everybody the story, and I'm completely honest. You know, so I mentioned growing up in those big league clubhouses. So the guys that were on the Phillies during that time were Mike Schmidt and Bob Boone, Larry Boa, Steve Carlton, and Dad retired. And I worshipped those guys when I was 8 years old. I thought I want to grow up and be Mike Schmidt or Larry Boa, you know. And then we come home. And Dad occasionally would take me to the Laker games in Valmeyer, and I would see the guys like Wayne and Alan Rolfing. And at that time, there was no difference in my mind between Mike Schmidt and Alan Rolfing. Like, I would go to those games and say, yeah, a year ago I wanted to be Mike Schmidt, and then now I'm watching Valmeyer and I want to be Alan Rolfing. You know, he's the best player on the field, and that's who I want to be. I didn't know any difference at the time. That's how much I looked up to all those guys who were playing in the Montclair League when I was little. So it was natural to want to be a player and someday play in the Montclair League.
And the other part of it too is the names that you have. Those were all good ball players. People had a chance to come out and watch good baseball. It wasn't just another civic league somewhere where there was 20 years and all. There was really, in fact, I was talking to Bob Blank, and he's somebody that might be interested in talking to after being president of the Montclair League for so long. He's got a list, I think, 7 or 8 or 9 players that played in the Montclair League that all played at the Big Show. They were all up in the MLB at one time or another. And some questionable ones, not that they weren't in there, but they couldn't remember whether or not they played on one of the teams that were, at that time. So they had really good players, and it was good baseball, and people enjoyed good baseball, and that made it competitive. And there was always, I think Brad, made a good point. You pull for your hometown and those players on there, and it was competitive enough that it made it interesting.
Now, how did you guys all get on the team? Because you were saying, did you guys call people, or did you guys have tryouts, or how did that work?
I think it was usually the coaches, whoever was running the team, whether it was Bernie or Denny Pieper, they reached out to people that they wanted to play. I don't ever remember there being a tryout, but you couldn't just show up and play. I mean, you had to be asked to play or kind of recruited to play. And
that's what I was asking. You guys made a phone call and said, hey, I want to be on the team, and they said, great, or were they calling you guys on the landline? Or?
I think they were usually calling the players, or word of mouth got spread to the player that, hey, we want you to play for us. But I don't think too many players picked up the phone and said, can I play for you? I don't know.
Dad was always out recruiting. He was at every college game, junior college game. He was calling people. A few times I do remember he had calls from people and they came out. He invited them out for a Wednesday night practice, and we kind of ran them through their paces a little bit, some of the veterans, and then he'd decide whether to give them a contract or, send them home. But
Decide if they get asked back the next
Yeah.
weekend.
I heard somebody say back in the 80s that the quality of play in the Montclair League was equivalent to AA, except for the pitching. The pitching wasn't as good, but the quality of the players, the hitting, and the fielding was AA quality. And the last year I played in '85, I think we had 6 guys on that team that either had played pro, never made it to the big show, or went on and played pro.
Yeah. I would say in the late 80s when Clay and I were playing Legion ball and just getting started to play for the Montclair League, almost every team had several guys that had either come back from playing pro ball or were on the verge of going to play pro ball. And again, it wasn't just one team like the Buds. Every single team had a handful of guys like that. That's how good the competition was. And I would agree as far as the pitching goes. I think the pitching was usually lacking or a notch below the hitting. Maybe because as guys got older, they couldn't throw as hard and that kind of thing, but guys could still hit even though they were a little older, but I'm not sure, but I would agree with that.
One thing we keep saying, well, they never made it to the big leagues. Brad did well, and there's a lot of other people there. When you go back in my dad's era, and probably your dad's as well, then you have to remember there were only 16 MLB teams. Mm-hmm. There were only 2 teams west of the Mississippi, one in the National League, which was St. Louis, and the other one was Kansas City in the American League. So some of the players that you say, well, they didn't make it into the big leagues. Well, some of those were out in the Pacific Coast League. And I remember my dad having those eyes of reverence, like this guy here hit 320 in the Pacific Coast League, almost at the same honor that they did in the Major League Baseball. Yeah. So you had people who all did play, and maybe they didn't all make it into the big show, but there were an awful lot of really good players, and they learned how to play the game. They weren't even developing in the big leagues at that time. The phrase that always bothered my dad was, he's going to be a good ball player in a couple of years. Well, in that era, if you weren't ready to play in the big leagues, you weren't there yet. There wasn't much development within the big leagues. So those players were all scattered about within. In Southern Illinois, it does have quite a proliferation of good talent down here.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, part of the attraction as a kid is like the second or third game when I was between junior and senior high school. I got to pitch against Nellie Mathews.
Yeah.
Right? Who had a good career, and he hit about a 500-foot triple off of me on an open field. It was just, I was honored to get to pitch against him. It was just fun.
For sure. It was, I talked about like the Rolfings and everything who I looked up to. And the same way when I would watch the Buds play, it was awesome. Then a few years later to play with and against those guys after being a young kid and watching them from the stands. And all of a sudden, I remember clear as day hitting second, and Alan Rolfing was hitting third. And I thought, geez, it was just a few years ago I was sitting in the bleachers and I thought this was one of the best players I'd ever seen, and now I'm in the same lineup. It was awesome. I think it's great about this league because young kids get to watch that and then maybe get to play with and against some of the guys that they used to look up to.
The reason he thought he was one of the best players around is
because he was.
Really good.
Yeah.
He was the only one of the Rolfing brothers that didn't sign.
Yeah.
He was the best player.
And he probably was the best player. Yeah, and that was the other thing Cal was talking, there were some guys, especially back in like his and my dad's era, but then even into the 70s, that there were some guys that just chose not to go pursue it in college or pro ball because the money wasn't the same as it is now, and they could make a better living doing other things, and if you really weren't that passionate about it, then you weren't going to move away and pursue it. And so there was a lot of good players that just chose maybe not to pursue it. Everybody talks in Moehrs about Randy Esker being one of the best pitchers that they ever saw, and he just got done with high school and didn't want to go to college, didn't want to pursue it, wanted to farm and just kind of get on with life, and he might have been one of the better players to ever come out of Moehrs. You just don't know, but it was just different back then, I think.
I don't know what it is too. I mean, you might be able to, especially down here, especially with Valmeyer and Waterloo as well. But I think Valmeyer's really got it. I mean, the long-standing culture of just even now you have special events down there and they're honoring people and it's ongoing. It's just not one and out, or 5 years I played and I'm no longer involved with it. These guys, man, they're involved with all kinds of special events, and I think everybody kind of bucks up, chips in with the time. Waterloo as well, but that's kind of unusual in amateur baseball as well.
Yeah, I think so. I hope it continues, because otherwise we're not going to have a Montclair League. So hopefully all these different towns and the people who are kind of running the teams stay that involved and keep getting the support. But
how many games a year are there? And has that changed since the 50s, or is it about the same schedule?
We played, first year I played, 1973, we were 51-5. So we played 56 games.
yeah, I
That
think
was the most. Usually it was around 50.
I think Denny usually
You
had.
could have just said 56 games. You didn't have to say 51.
I think I remember seeing the schedule in Valmeyer, and Denny always had, when the schedule would come out, always had like 60 or 65 games, and then we'd have rainouts or we'd cancel a few and end up playing 50 or 55. But it was a lot of
You got
games.
the double headers, right? I mean, or
Yeah.
just a Saturday and a Sunday all the time, or did you guys play?
It varied. Vernie was usually a little lighter for you guys, at least later. I don't know.
Yeah, later.
We would play a doubleheader Sunday. We would either play a game or a doubleheader on Saturday or Friday, one of the two, and usually on a Wednesday night every other week we'd play a game.
Yeah. Back then, the league, we always, and I'm saying back then, like when Clay and I were playing, we always played league doubleheader on Sunday.
Yes.
And then during the middle of the week or Saturday, just kind of varied depending on what Denny could set up and that kind of thing. But a lot of times we played doubleheader Saturday and doubleheader Sunday.
Yeah.
Not non-league on Saturday against Cape or whoever, and then a league doubleheader on Sunday. Some long weekends of ball. And then when Clay and I were playing Legion ball, we were playing both. One year I played Junior Legion, Senior Legion, and Montclair League. And I have to tell you, by the middle of August, I'm throwing my freaking ball and glove away. And can we just start playing basketball or something? I was so tired of baseball, but we played a lot back then.
Well, Valmeyer played a lot of Saturday, Sundays because you didn't have lights.
Correct.
Then
We
once
couldn't-
Waterloo got lights, we would play every Wednesday, Friday night,
And then take off
league
on
games
Saturday.
Sunday, yeah. And then makeups on, because the Montclair League always had their makeups on Saturdays if you were great.
You wanted to leave that
Sunday.
open, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Sack of the time commitment. You must have very understanding spouses, or I guess maybe a lot of it was before you had the kids. Very understanding spouse.
Yes.
Well, we were talking before we went on camera that as a young kid, I remember the older players, their wives and young kids were down there at the field watching the games, having a few drinks. Their kids were running around. That was just kind of what their weekend was about back then. And I don't know if it happens as much now, but the families were just kind of part of it.
My wife was at a game in Highland. She was about 8.5 months pregnant. It was about 100. And there was some call or something. And I knew she was miserable, and I just rode the hump and got kicked out of the game and took her home.
Probably a smart move.
Brad just brought up one that I think is kind of interesting as well. He said he couldn't wait to be playing basketball. I think what a lot of people don't know, I mean, we talk about this, and this is a baseball podcast, but I think everybody at this table played multiple sports and actually were good athletes in their own rights in basketball or football. Or whatever they played. Our parents were the same way. My dad was the same way.
Sure.
He played a lot of basketball. In fact, that's what he went away to school to play. And it's kind of interesting. And when you go back, we banged it around a little bit in the Columbia gym, and you go back to that. But It's just well, kind of a quick story was I was playing out at St. Clair Country Club and Bob Golby was out there and I said, "Hey, Mr. Golby," I said, "my name's Cal Neeman." And he goes, "Oh, Cal, yeah." And he goes, "Your dad was the best basketball player I ever played against." And I went home and told my dad, I said, "Hey, I saw Bob Golby." He goes, "What, did you say hi to him?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, and my dad said, "Best basketball player I ever played against." So here's a Masters winner and a 7-year Major League career, with Korea in there. And what did they go back to? Banging it out on the basketball on the hardwood floor. So that competitiveness, it is baseball. This is about that, but it's just you just have competitive people who like to try to win.
Yeah, for sure.
Cal, your dad led the people Tigers to the 1947 state championship.
Yeah, he was. He had an NBA contract as well. He could have won and played. So yeah, he was. I mean, some argue that he was a better basketball player than he was a baseball player. He and Mickey Mantle signed in Joplin together, and I always told him, I said, the Yankees did a better job of picking Mantle over you. Maybe you should have went ahead and kept playing basketball. But he didn't laugh too much about it. Like mind your manners, young man.
Well, we were talking earlier about how back then some guys just chose not to pursue it, and so Dad was the same way in basketball. The New York Knicks offered him a tryout, and he just didn't want to make the trip to New York, you know.
He had
and
to
so,
pay for it.
yeah. And so think about that nowadays. Like if any kid got the chance to try out for the Knicks, like you drop everything and whatever it costs, you fly there, you do it. And that Dad was like, "Well, I was already signed to play baseball, and I was just decided I was going to pursue that." And I remember him telling me like, What in the world, Dad? But yeah, different thought process back then.
Well, it's such a different game. The business of those sports is such a different thing now. Where back then, what guys were signing on, for
I think his was like if he would have gone there and made the team, I think the Knicks were going to pay him $5,000. That was going to be his annual salary. So.
Yeah, I mean those guys would come back and
so that wasn't enough to make you.
They make a minute.
That's wasn't enough to make you drop everything and drive to New York, right? So I get it, but it was just different.
Well, and I'm sorry, Mr. Neeman, when you were talking about it, I was wondering now, and it seems like kids now get one sport and specialize in that and go, and I've always wondered that, to your point. Does it develop athletes better to play different sports and not just pick one and ride it, 9 months of the year?
Well, you better. That's a long.
We could have a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, I mean that is. I feel for the parents now. They're almost forced to do that. I have a nephew who's playing ball now with the Diamondbacks, and he was on that Mississippi team that won the national championship. And I remember I said, let's go play golf. Oh, he don't have time to play golf. Let him do this, let him do that. I was telling my sister and brother-in-law, I was like, let him play everything, let him play. I think, to me, I don't know. It's a tough call now. I mean, what do you think? I mean, as a parent, if they don't, they won't get seen. There's nobody gets picked up on a school lot. Like you talk about Wayne, and Wayne and I were talking the other day, there wasn't the draft that there is now. I don't know when it expanded. People signed you at tryouts, or they'd see you somewhere and they would send it away. You would go away and try to play that. Those days are gone. I think if a child has a passion, that you're almost forced to pay all that money and paid coaches for 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds now. I mean, you have to. It's not. Do I think it's better? You just have to.
I listen to MLB on XM all the time, and they had one day. They were interviewing a college coach, and he was like, "I don't want a kid coming. I'm not going to sign a kid to a college contract, a pitcher that plays on a team that plays 80 or 90 games a summer, because he's going to need Tommy John surgery before he leaves college." And he says, for position players, if they play soccer and things like that, their footwork is so much better. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Probably cuts both ways.
I think the specialization, kids get better faster. In other words, if you have a 10-year-old that's playing 80 games, then he's going to be better than a 10-year-old that's playing 20. but it doesn't necessarily mean that 10-year-old's going to get to the big leagues. It just accelerates kind of how good they are, but it still comes down to talent, how big and strong you get, all those kind of things. So I think sometimes the specialization maybe kind of gives the parents and other people kind of this false hope, like, well, look how good my 10-year-old is compared to this other. Well, if your 10-year-old's taking lessons year-round and doing those things, he probably is going to be better than other 10-year-olds. Doesn't mean he's going to get to the big leagues. And I think sometimes the parents get enamored with that instead of saying, maybe my 10-year-old should just play half as many games, but also play golf or basketball. And gradually, as they get older, they'll start to excel at something. I don't have any problem with the specialization when somebody's a junior in high school and there's a college scholarship at stake. I just think specialization when you're 10 years old, like, God, let the kids do everything and just see what they like and what they actually are good at, because you just, when you're that young, you just don't know. So just enjoy it all. Man, some of my favorite high school memories are basketball. If you told me, hey, Rip, list the top 10 things you remember from high school, it'd probably be 9 basketball games, And so if my parents would have came to me and made me specialize and start playing in some select league and not play basketball and not do other things, I would have missed out on a lot. That's the way I feel.
The whole time frame is pushed so early now. It's like for baseball scholarships, they're signing letter of intents as a sophomore in high school now.
Yeah.
So a lot. You take somebody, like I'm that example. Like my junior, senior year, I wasn't very good. I was throughout most of my growing up, I was the littlest kid in the class. And so later on, you kind of, they're missing out on a lot of these players that get bigger and stronger, getting back to the Monroe, getting back to the baseball. Those are a lot of the players that maybe didn't grow till they were a senior in high school, and maybe even a year out. Well, when they got in the Montclair League, they were pretty good athletes, and they were been playing baseball. So a lot of them, I think more of them are getting overlooked now too. It's just so hard. I don't really know which way to go. If I had a 6-year-old son right now.
Yeah, it's hard. That is for sure.
So to get back to the Montclair League, and you mentioned Tommy John surgery. With you guys playing that many games, and that wasn't a thing, for someone then. If you messed up your elbow or your shoulder, then they just put you at first base, or you just. Was their career in? A lot of guys quit playing because they threw out their arm, and then you just couldn't fix it.
I don't know that there was that much of it.
I don't remember career-ending injuries back then. I don't know. It was kind of an odd thing.
But I started as a pitcher and a first baseman, and I hurt my arm after my senior year of high school, and tried to pitch through it a little bit. And I'm sure I had a rotator cuff, but never had it looked at. Yeah, I went to first base.
I know for the Buds, Rick Keefe played a long time and played outfield. Then he pitched for a while, and then later in his career, he had an arm injury, and he went to a sidearm and just changed his style, and was very effective and had a great continued career because of it, and just went right through the injury.
Yeah, I think the Montclair League catalyst for retirement is pain. So if your arm hurt too bad that you couldn't, brush your teeth the next morning.
I was going to say, I think Monday mornings were probably a good indicator of when it was time for guys to hang it up.
I couldn't walk on Monday.
When they were supposed to go to work and couldn't, then that was probably a sign.
And is the league kind of changing that way, that it's more of younger players now and not? You guys played until, I'm guessing, your mid-30s or something. And is there many players that do that now? And if not, what has changed in the last 30 years or 20 years, Brad?
Yeah, we were talking about it earlier before we kind of got started. I think it's a combination of things, but I think people's work schedules are different now than they used to be, and people are busier now than they used to be. Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people just work 9 to 5 and then have every night and every weekend off. And I don't think now, when you have a family and different work schedules, that's always the case. So you just don't have the free time to say, I'm going to spend every Saturday and Sunday at the ballpark playing a doubleheader when I'm 33 years old, like guys used to. So I just think that's changed.
It's not necessarily talent or anything, it's just life catches up with you probably.
Yeah, I just think people's schedules have changed.
You gotta love it. You gotta love it. I mean, if y'all haven't read Craig Owen's book, Kings of the County League, he has a chapter in there on the Midsummer Classic, and he captures it completely. The smell of the pork steaks cooking, the crowd, some of them are drinking too much, and there's a lot of, hassling going back and forth. He captures it perfectly. I would highly recommend it if you haven't read the book. He really does.
Do you guys remember what your biggest game was in the Montclair League, where you went 5 for 5 with something, or was there any big brawls that happened between? I remember you years ago, Clay, telling me about there was a little bit of a shake-up in one game. I assume it didn't happen.
A few separate brawls.
I was involved in one little dust-up with the Buds.
During the playoffs?
Yeah. I'll elaborate if you want me to, but so we were talking earlier about how there were guys you looked up to when you were younger, before we started playing. So one of my first years sitting on the bench for the Lakers, and I think I actually started playing the summer after my 8th grade year, but I didn't play. I had a uniform, but I carried the equipment, I kept the scorebook, and kind of observed, there was a lot to observe, on what was going on in the dugout and on the field. Anyway, one of the guys who was then playing at that time for Sajay, they were a new team in the league, and it was Neil Fiala. And he had played briefly in the big leagues, and so immediately I looked up to him. Again, man, I want to be that guy. I want to play in the big leagues, and now he's here playing in Valmeyer, So I looked up to him a lot. A few years later, I'm playing, and I tried to bunt, and their pitcher hit me, and Neil came running in and said some things about me not being good enough, basically, to get out of the way, and I'm standing on first base, and I remember thinking, man, this is the guy I used to look up to, and now he's telling me I can't play, and it stuck with me. So I'm bad about holding grudges. So that would have been like 1987, and then 1996, I've played college, I've played pro ball, and I'm back, and now Neil's playing for the Buds, and I didn't have a lot of respect for him because of what he had said to me 10 years earlier, and he slides into second base, and he says something else to me, and it was the first time I was ever on a ball field and wanted to choke somebody, and so we got into a heated argument, and the benches cleared, and I don't think any punches were thrown on that day, but then that probably led to a couple years later, the Buds and Lakers got into another fight involving Neil Fiala, and it probably stemmed from what I started.
Well, that was his last game too, right? He was retired.
The second dust-up was, and the funny side note to that story is a few weeks before that playoff game, I'm with Clay, and I was like, what do you think of Neil? And he's like, well, he's obviously a great player, but it can be frustrating to play with him sometimes because he rips on his own players when they don't play well, that kind of thing. And he goes, sometimes I think even our guys don't like him, as good of a player as he is. And so that kind of stuck in my head. So that night when I'm arguing with Neil, I'm yelling, your own players don't even like you. I must have said that like 10 times. Your own players want me to kick your ass. They don't even like you. And it was all because Clay planted that seed in my mind. But since then, I think I've patched things up with Neil. We've talked several times, and I don't want to kill him anymore. So
in general, was it pretty friendly feuds with the other teams, or was it?
I think my experience was I never had animosity. Matter of fact, a lot of the Buds guys I loved, the Wally brothers and obviously Clay. I mean, off the field I'd see them and I loved them and I respected them, but for a few hours on Sunday, I didn't like them at all. And Bernie, Vernie and my dad coached, they ref basketball together. My earliest memories of play are riding in the car with Vernie and my dad to go ref college basketball. And then Vernie and my dad coached us in Junior Legion and Legion Ball together. And so I had all the respect in the world for Vernie. But man, on Sunday afternoon, when I'd hear him yelling in that high-pitched voice, it just drove me crazy. And same with the Wally brothers, like these freaking guys, But after the game, awesome dudes, awesome guys.
Yeah,
It's just the competitiveness in it.
Well, I
good
had,
rivalries.
I had family in Valmeyer, and I was down there all the time, and so I was friends with all those guys. Rolfings and Flurkies and Eskers. But yeah, we wanted to kick their butt, but have a beer afterwards and laugh it up, Nobody ever wanted to hit anybody.
Oh, yeah.
At least not with a fist. Maybe a ball.
You ask about good performances. One that I remember vividly happened with Brad. So Brad and I were very good friends growing up and going through school, and he got done with pro ball and came back to play in the Montclair League, and so we were playing them, I believe, on a Friday night, and then a doubleheader Sunday. Is that how or was it Sunday to Friday night?
Let me think about this. We played a Sunday afternoon, and then the following week played again to start the playoffs or something like that. Sunday afternoon was the last game of the regular season, and then playoffs started like that week, and then we played again on the next Sunday afternoon.
So Brad proceeded to hit in one set of doubleheaders. He hit 4 home runs in a row. So I think it was his last 2 at-bats of one game. 2 at-bats, I think we walked him in between there. Hits 4 home runs in 4 consecutive at-bats. Then it was a Friday night, because I know the last 2 home runs were on Friday night. Comes back on Friday night playing them. He hits 2 more home runs in the next 2 at-bats. He hit 6 home runs in a row against us.
Is that a record?
Somewhere it is.
It's gotta be. I've never seen it happen before.
I remember around in second base after the 3rd or 4th one, and Clay was playing second, and I'm coming towards second, and he walks up and he's like, "You gotta be effing shitting me." And I'm sure I was laughing just like that. Yeah, crazy.
It was awesome.
Crazy stuff.
And they didn't plunk him the next time? Or
No.
Just kept
Actually, there's 2 parts I always think about during that time. Dad at that time was coaching, so he wasn't there. But a lot of times when I was playing, I would think, and you guys probably did this too with the dads that you had. I would think, what would Dad be telling me now? When I was on the ball field, if I struck out 3 times, what would Dad be telling me? And so I hit 2 home runs, and I was thinking the normal tendency is to go up and try and hit a 3rd one, right? And so I'm in the on-deck circle, and I'm saying, Dad would be telling you to not be trying to hit the 3rd home run, because you definitely won't if you're trying. So Dad would be saying, just hit the ball the other way, hit a ball to right center. So I did, and I hit a home run to right center. So then I'm coming up for the 4th at bat, and Warren Ferens is pitching, who was kind of a veteran guy, and I thought, Warren's going to hit me for sure. So I'm standing on deck, and I just know he's going to drill me. And so he starts this curveball right at my ear hole, and it breaks right down the middle. And I stepped out, and I was so mad at myself for just allowing that head game, to even think he was going to drill me, instead of just going up there and having the normal approach. And so then he threw another curveball, and I hit that one out too. It was kind of crazy, but I did expect to get hit, and I don't know, Bernie must not have ordered it, I guess.
Good thing me and you were friends. I think Bernie has a soft spot in his heart for you.
You might have been playing first base. You might have been playing first base. I'd have told Warren to hit you right when I kicked it. But I did that once in another game.
Yeah, that stuff went on for sure. That's why I was just assuming I was going to get hit. But we were talking about the competitiveness, and I remember this too. Mark Vogel and I he was a couple years older than me, but we sat on the bench for the Lakers for a couple years. And then Mark got the chance to go play for the Buds. And we're playing the first game against the Buds since Mark went, and he's playing second base. And one of our guys went in the second, didn't even slide, just ran him over at second base. And leading up to that time, Bernie would always called Valmeyer the minor leagues and the Buds the big leagues. And so he would give me trouble and say, one of these days, I'm going to call you up to the big leagues, Brad, and you're going to play for the Buds. And not that I ever considered it, but I always thought the Buds were great, and I liked all their guys, and they always beat our ass, and I thought, maybe someday I will play for the Buds. And so one of our guys runs over Mark Vogel at second. And I remember sitting on the bench going, yeah, I don't think I could ever go up and play for Waterloo. Like it was pretty clear that that's the message. If you're going to go play for Waterloo, then this is what's going to happen. All right, I'm just going to stay in Valmeyer and enjoy myself down here.
Well, and Brad, who put this together, is not in there right now. I mean, he kind of selected this dais, if you will, because of all of your fathers are pretty prolific. And I was kind of wanting to go around the room a little bit and talk about each of your fathers and some of their things. I mean, and we start over there, you talk about your dad could have tried out for the Knicks. And then you guys say, and somebody who was refereeing in college basketball too at some point?
Our dads both refereed college basketball, yeah. A lot of together, a lot of games together, but yeah.
That's not a thing that casually usually just comes up. Usually, that's a pretty big deal back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How were you able to coach or referee or officiate college back then? You just took a class on Saturday? And
I don't know what they had to do it, and you know I don't know how they communicated back then, like how they got in touch with college athletic directors and got on people's schedules. I don't know how that was done, but yeah, they did it.
I know with Dad, quite frequently the college coaches that he did a lot of games for, Mineral Area, Three Rivers, once they started to hire him and he did a good job, then they would call him back.
He was just on their list.
He was on their list, and anytime they needed to fill spots, and you know, at the beginning of the seasons, he got a lot of calls from schools just because he had worked there.
And what did those games pay? $50 a game?
It was something like that. Yeah. It was like $50, and then if you did both JV and varsity, you might like 75 or something like
I'm saying you really had to love to drive to that far away. I mean, you're losing money by the time you're transferring gas and getting a burger at the sandwich shop or something. So you had to really want to do that. Because it's, again, going back to the Knicks drive and everything, the world is a lot different now. I don't think people understand that back then it wasn't as glamorous and it wasn't ESPN broadcasting all the games and everything. I mean, you just did it, I guess, because you really liked it. And to go back to your dad went from, so didn't try out for the Knicks, and then you mentioned the Phillies. As a kid, he was coaching for the Phillies, but in between there was some.
So he got drafted, or not got drafted, got signed out of college because there wasn't a draft back then. Got signed out of college like in '53, I think, and then played in the minor leagues for about 13 years with just a brief cup of coffee in the big leagues, just a couple months in the big leagues as a player, and then went into coaching and coached in the minor leagues and up until 1970, and that's when he got the big league job with the Phillies. Coached in the big leagues for the Phillies until '78, and then retired to come home and run our family farm from 1978 to '88. And then when I went to college, he got back into pro ball as a coach, and then stayed in pro ball. And so that would have been '88 until the early 2000s. He was still coaching in his 70s before he retired the second time. So.
How much influence was your dad able to have on Steve Carlton, or did he just get out of his way?
He always told the story about Steve Carlton. Really two stories. One was he was at his hotel in spring training, and Steve Carlton was fighting with the Cardinals about his contract. And at the same time, Rick Wise, who was the Phillies' best pitcher, was fighting with the Phillies about their contract. And the Phillies and Cardinals were able to agree to trade them both, but the GM wanted Dad's input as the pitching coach, and so called Dad kind of in the middle of the night in his hotel room and said, hey, we have a chance to trade Rick Wise for Steve Carlton. Should we do it? And Dad said, you better do it before they change their mind. And Dad had been a pitching coach by then a couple years and he had seen Carlton in the minor leagues, but then he had seen him a couple years in the big leagues with the Cardinals. And so that was before the 72 season. So Carlton comes over to spring training, and Carlton, I think, was from California, so warm weather, and he had been throwing a little bit, which some guys didn't do back then. It's crazy to think about now, but some guys came to spring training and not picked up a ball, Dad would say. So his pitchers that lived up in the Northeast or whatever, he said they'd show up and the first time they had played catch would be the first day of spring training, which, again, with all the training and everything the guys do now, just seems crazy. But anyway, Carlton comes in, he says, yeah, I've been throwing, I'm ready to throw a bullpen or whatever. And so they go out on the first day, and Carlton throws, and he doesn't throw any sliders. Throws whatever, 25 pitches, and it's just fastball, curveball change. And Dad said, I saw you pitch in the minor leagues a few years ago in Tulsa, and you had a really good slider. How come you're not throwing that anymore? He said, well, the Cardinals thought if I threw too many sliders, then I would lose some of my other pitches. And Dad said, well, I think that's crazy. He goes, yeah, if you threw nothing but sliders, maybe, but if you kind of have a regimen and work on all of them and throw all of them, kind of a certain amount in the game, then you're going to be fine. You need to start throwing that slider because I haven't seen a slider in the big leagues as good as what I saw you throwing in Tulsa a few years ago. And so Steve said, okay, I'll start throwing it. And then he won the Cy Young that year and won 27 games. And so it wasn't Dad. Some people think Dad taught him the slider. No, Dad just convinced him you need to start throwing it more than what the Cardinals are having to throw it. So, and Steve was kind of a different guy mentally, kind of marched to, his own beat. And so going back to your point, I think Dad figured out a way to prod him a little bit, but at the same time stay out of his way and let him be his own guy. And Dad always told me coaching is trying to figure out the guys who need a pat on the back and also the guys who need to kick in the ass and whatever you have to do to get the most out of them. And so I guess with Carlton, he figured that out. So, yeah, good stuff.
Go ahead.
All right. So my dad, Vern Moehrs, he grew up in Reno, loved baseball from day one. I remember him telling me how he worked for his grandpa on the farm until he had enough money to buy his first baseball glove. And he actually, before that, he built one out of an old leather work glove that he put a webbing in. So he was dedicated to baseball from a very young age. Then he went to high school in Waterloo, and in order to play, he had to hitchhike home he lived in Haggard, had to hitchhike home every night after practice to play ball. So he was committed to that. And then once he got done, in '52, he started playing for the Warriors and just loved it. And so he played for, I believe, 9 years as a player, and then he became player manager in 1961, and has continued to manage the Buds, the Warriors, the Buds, and then they became the Millers for a brief period there at the end. He never once charged a player a penny. He raised all the funds for his teams every year, did it all himself. He mowed the grass at the Ball Diamond himself with our own lawnmower. I did some of that when I was a kid. So he was dedicated to baseball in the community and the Montclair League. I remember just from a young age, I was going to ball games. I was squeezed in a pickup truck between him and Carl Brown, or him and Carl Pinion, Lonnie Fulte, some great baseball players from the area, baseball legends in their own right. And so I was drawn to baseball from an early age. I mean, I spent countless Sundays, St. Laborie, St. Jacob, Ninnerts, Myers, Shiloh. I mean, we were all over the place at ball games and just loved it. And he had tremendous success. He had over 2,000 victories in his career. So, it's fun when you're following a team that's always winning. You very rarely get that. Myself, I'm a Browns fan in football. I understand how great it is when you can follow a team that always wins, right? And the Buds were that for me throughout the years. It just made sense that when I got old enough, I started playing for them, and I loved every minute of it. Getting to play with Dad and playing against some of the best baseball players in the area, people that really had opportunities to not only play professional ball as we've talked, but just stuck around and played because they love playing. Well into their 30s and some guys into their 40s.
So would you have made the team if your dad wasn't the manager?
You know what? I don't know. I certainly wouldn't play.
You earlier asked, how do you get on the team? You make sure your dad's a
It
man.
certainly helps when your dad's the coach, right? Yeah, that certainly made a big difference with me getting on the team. And there were times when Dad was coaching the Buds, but then he coached Brad and I and our Legion team for several years. And for a while there, we had Dad, Bud, and Lonnie Fulte were our three managers. So we had three legends managing our Legion team, and that was some of the funnest baseball I've ever played.
Agreed.
And we had a great time. So he's been dedicated to baseball in this community for a long time.
Well, if you were riding around and you were fortunate enough to sit between your dad and Carl, that's good, because I can remember going to games on Friday nights and in that little Mustang that he had, and he had the 460 air conditioning, 4 windows open, 60 miles an hour, and Gary Wheat and I would argue or fight over who was not going to sit behind Bernie as a driver because he was chewing all the way, and you'd have tobacco juice on your shoulder of your suit, your uniform by the time you got to the bank. It was great.
Great memories.
Hey, Mark, you brought up baseball, right?
I did. So these guys all their dads played pro ball and stuff. But the one thing that my dad did that nobody else did is he played with Rogers Hornsby, and I'm not exactly sure how it started, but my grandpa, when my dad was 3, wrote a letter to Rogers Hornsby, apparently, that said, "Hey, my kid's a phenom. He's 3 years old." They didn't have video back then. Well, I have the letter with me. Rogers Hornsby wrote him back and said, "Hey, his nickname was Applesauce. How's Applesauce doing? Blah, blah, blah. Looks like he's going to be a player." Well, somehow that resulted on June 15th of 1927. Dad had just turned 4 2 months before that. Between games of the doubleheader, Rogers Hornsby tossed batting practice to my dad at Sportsman's Park. And the thing, there's no pictures that I've been able to find. There's a picture, I think, taken before he went, but there's no pictures on the field. And what Dad remembered the most about it is the fans tossed coins on the field. And he quickly forgot about hitting balls and was picking up nickels and dimes, which was a lot of money back then, and stuff in his pockets. And that's what he remembered the most about it, which that's his big story. The other big thing is when he was in the service, he was in the Air Force on Tinian. He was a navigator in the, whatever the guy in the movie Unbroken did, the Death Trap airplane. And baseball was huge. That's what they did. And there was a team called the Manila Dodgers that was all major league players. And I remember Dad saying he hit off a early win because Dad played for the base team. They were the only team to beat the Manila Dodgers. They beat them 1-0. Manila went 47-1, kind of like the Buds. And he said he threw Joe Garagiola out at third, trying to go first to third. And I don't know if he was playing second base, if it was a relay, or he was playing right field. But that was his big play for the team. So that's his claim to fame, I think.
And your dad was a big person in the community. He helped with human support services. I think he was elected the director.
No, he was on the school board, and his pet charity was helping strays, which is why I was up here yesterday for that golf tournament. I'm going to continue being a donor for that, but that was his big passion. But he was real active in the community with being on the school board. Even when he wasn't elected to school board, he stayed on as treasurer for years and years and years.
And then your dad, Cubs, almost rookie of the year. Is that?
He was the team voted him most valuable player.
Okay.
With Ernie Banks and some of those other guys that were on the team. I don't know how many doubleheaders he caught his rookie year. He set I don't know, some obscure catcher double play that somebody told me it's still still a record, that kind of stuff. So if you want a little background. So he went to Illinois Wesleyan on a basketball scholarship, and he asked the baseball coach if he could play baseball. And pretty much they had him sitting on the bench. He got a chance to play and did well. And there was a scout, and if you remember the names, it makes the story better, but I seem to forget them, if I even remembered them in the first place. But they said, hey, go to Joplin. The Yankees are having a tryout down there. And he got off the train, and he said, I'm Cal Neeman. They said, well, you're not on the list, but they saw some 6'2", scrappy, farm-looking kid, and they said, all right, kid, I can take you on my team. And he did. It was one of those 10 RBIs in one game story and all that kind of stuff, you know how it goes. And the other person that was on that team they signed was Mickey Mantle. So my dad was signed in the Yankee organization. And so he and Mickey came up, and almost all the books about Mickey before he got to New York, Dad's in there. So I would read them, and I said, Dad, did you guys do this? And he goes, oh no, that wasn't me. That was Pasco or somebody like that. You know, he denied it, that sticking his head through a convertible roof and all the stories that you hear going on. So he came up in the Yankee organization, and one day I was digging through a trunk when I was a young kid, and there was a piece of cardboard that was frayed on the corners, and it was written in fountain pen. And I said, hey Dad, what's this? You know? And he goes, let me see that. And he smiles, you know. And he said, that's the Yankee way. And I go, the Yankee way? And he goes, yeah. And on that little piece of cardboard, he had all the responsibilities, like when you get to the ballpark, who you tip, the door people, what you do. A standard bellhop tip is a nickel a bag. A Yankee tips 10 cents a bag.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it was, and all the responsibilities, when you're in the dugout, when you're on the on-deck circle, you know, you're the home plate coach, you know, see where the outfielders were. And it was just a whole list written out in fountain pen that he always went over, so he kind of knew the Yankee way. And oftentimes my dad would say, somebody would say, were you a big league ball player? And he goes, yeah, but he said, yeah, but I was a Yankee. And if you think about it, those years, they were like a lot of other prolific organizations that have linebackers or whatever. The catchers coming through that Yankee, Bill Dickey, Elston Howard, I can't even remember, Yogi Berra. I mean, they were loaded with catchers. If you were a catcher and you were double, triple A with the Yankees, you were as good as just about anybody else. So Korea came, he went, and then they had a special draft. And that's when the Cubs picked him up. And when the Cubs picked him up, that's when he went right away and started playing as a rookie and did really well. And, you don't really remember the stories till somebody reminds you of something.
Yeah.
You're talking about Carlton there. One of the stories that I remember my dad telling was he caught Robin Roberts, a Hall of Fame pitcher. And in a big league game, he said he caught him 7 innings before they ever threw an off-speed pitch. That was Robbie's fastball. And Roberts had a 4-seam that must have just popped because he was getting big. And that's the era of all the big hitters. You know, I mean, the Braves, the lineups that they put in.
Yeah.
You know, those kinds of things. But overall, if I say anything, I get the ultimate respect. Man, my dad was a great person. He was a great educator. And getting touched up here a little bit. Tomorrow is the date of his death, but it was he raised us in a really kind of a neat way. So the baseball stories, Henry Aaron, you know, how do they get him out? They said you got to get Henry, you got to make him mad. And my dad said Aaron came up and he was the first one to start wearing those white stirrups and took some dirt and spit and threw it on the back of his white socks. And Aaron must have got really pissed off. And they said he just hit one out in the dark, you know. And when he came into the dugout, they said, not that effing mad, Cal. And then, you know, Stan Musial stories, you know, they were in the coaching how they're going to pitch him. And he said, you know, everybody pitches Musial away. You know, he keeps hitting doubles off of us, you know. Like, let's try and jam him. Same story, usual turned on one and hit it out over the wall. And they said, you got any other bright ideas, Neeman? So all the baseball stories were there, the greats that he got a chance to play with. That was really special. As far as baseball, he was, like I said, he was with the Cubs, and he went to Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. I know that I was watching the Game of the Week 10, 15 years ago, and McCarver was over, and they asked who they thought the best catcher, the best arm they ever saw as a catcher, and he said Calhoun.
No kidding.
Yeah. So there's a story in Birmingham that he got argued with somebody over a call and took and threw the ball out over the center field fence. So when I was in Legion, I tried my best. I could get it over the left field down that way, but I didn't have the arm to throw it out. I don't know if you ever stood at home plate and tried to throw a ball out of center field. It sounds easy, but it's not quite as easy as it sounds.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you. I was saying that generation too, stopping in the middle of their career to go into the service because you said he went into Korea.
Yeah.
So do you remember what years was he gone from 19 to 23 and then had to...
I know it would have been...
Not trying to put you on the spot with years, but it's just a different world.
Now you're asking me like history. I don't know when the Korean, what was it, 40?
Yeah.
50 to 52.
51 in there, yeah.
It's just, today could you imagine these ball players today having to leave their career for 3 or 4 years to go and do that? I mean,
it was active duty.
Yeah.
They weren't in,
Ted Williams, that's a little fighter plane, like it wasn't just, we're going to go, take notes somewhere or whatever. Yeah, it's crazy.
They weren't working in the mess hall back in the rear.
Yeah. But they did know other players and, that kind of stuff that were there. Because he'd say, I saw so-and-so, he was in a platoon or, whatever. Then he wanted to coach. I mean, how unusual is that? An old ball player wants to coach. And he didn't have a degree, and because he left Illinois Wesleyan, and it's interesting, he said he just lived like it was normal, So when he was when he got back, he was going to school full time, working part time. My mom worked full time. My grandma kind of raised me through that so that he could go ahead and get a degree and start coaching and doing some of the other stuff that he wanted to do. But when their stories come up, you don't, you can remember them then, but unless there's some kind of association. But he was, the baseball, I think, a little bit different. That's like, well, how did my dad raise me? That'd be different than maybe might be all MLB players. Their dads were raised like this. Like, I always knew from a young boy on who Hal Smith was. And if you don't know who that was the player, that was the Pittsburgh player that tied the game up to give Mazeroski the chance to win the game.
Yeah.
So he was always supporting, he's always saying, hey, but so-and-so, even when we were in Legion ball, but he got the third out here, bases were loaded, that was the big out. And so he kind of raised this on that just the headlines weren't always what you looked at, that way. And the other thing was, the few times I did catch, and I watched the pros now, and he kept telling me, quit catching the hitters. Like if I called a changeup blown away 3-2, he'd say, the hitter would be out, but your pitcher isn't going to throw, a 3-2 changeup blown away. You got to catch your pitcher first, and how you set him up to get the out. So it was good, just life lessons all the way through. He was a special man. Yeah, I miss him a lot.
Can you speak about his Dupo connection?
So Maplewood at that time, there wasn't a Cahokia High School. So Dupo School District went all the way from, I think, Washington Avenue maybe, at least all of Centerville, right into East St. Louis, all the way down. And I'm not even sure if Columbia may or may not have had a high school in the early 50s, I don't know, 40s. So that was a really huge district. So he ended up going to school in Dupo. So that's how he got to Dupo, even though he lived in Cahokia there.
Did his picture one time hit in the hallway in Dupo?
Yeah.
I remember from high school coming down the ramp and seeing a Cubs catcher
Yeah, that was him. That was it. Yeah. What's that story of? Better be a big fish in a small pond, I guess. If you're gonna, you get better your picture hung, you do both than not hung at all, I guess. Yeah, no, he was a humble man. He was, again, they got to play against the very best of the very best. And, only 16 teams, 8 teams in the National League. Those guys were all good players. And they recognized a lot of very other good players that were out there that didn't make it.
My uncle Chuck was in the AAA, made it to AAA in the Yankees organization in the 50s. Not, as you said, not a good organization to be in if you want, and he played first base. And when he passed, I had never seen this before. He taught me footwork and first base. He taught me he gave me a glove. But he lost my train of thought. When he passed, there was a picture there of him scooping the ball at first base, and it said, "To the best player who never got a chance while he was in the Hall of Fame." And I didn't realize they even knew each other. My college coach tried to get him to change something at first base, and I showed him why he was wrong. He said, "Keep doing it.
Well, the entire minor league system back then was different than it is now.
Yeah.
I remember that, I think it was Birmingham. Mantle was on that team, and I wish I could remember 4 or 5 other big league Yankee players were all on that team, and they were in Double-A, and they were kind of moaning and complaining that why weren't they going to get sent up to Triple-A the next year? And at that time, one of the managers or part owners or whatever, the Yankees came in and they said, "Look, this team here will not know what it's like to not win a pennant." So they had this core that they were moving up throughout the whole Yankee organization as a group, and that's not done. People are bought and sold, and they trade off, and that whole culture of baseball has kind of gone that way. And I think that may be one of the problems that the Cardinals are having now too, because they have so many people that didn't come through the Cardinal organization that was there. If they are a good organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Sure.
I really appreciate all the time you guys have given us, and I wanted to ask Brad, do you have anything specific you wanted to talk about before?
Let Rip talk about his dad a little bit.
Yeah, you don't need to let
Let's talk about Bud, and one of the things that was really enthralling to me, Brad, is your experience growing up in one situation, and then that culture shock whenever you moved back.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, I was born in '70, and that was the first year Dad was the Phillies pitching coach. So my earliest memories are being in Philadelphia and him being the pitching coach for the Phillies. And then he retired and came home to run our family farm. So from that point, I was 8 years old till I was 18. I was no different than a lot of kids in Valmeyer. Just grew up on a farm, loved sports, and went to school, and that's what we did. And I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back, I think it was great for me, because if Dad would have stayed in pro baseball, and I probably would have been more spoiled and probably not as hard a worker, because I just would have been around that life, and that's all I would have known. Coming home and having a normal childhood and seeing him go to work on the farm every day and do normal things like go to the Lions Club meeting or those kind of things shaped who I am now, and it's made me do those, made me be involved in those things, and it really just opened my eyes to watch him go to work every day and how hard he worked and how humble he was. Even though he had that long career in baseball, he didn't talk about it much when he was around other people down in Valmeyer. And when he passed away, which was a little over a year ago, I had a few people from down in Valmeyer tell me, they said, the great thing about your dad is I served with him on the Farm Bureau or whatever. I used to spend 2 hours in the car with him each way to go to these meetings, and he would never talk about baseball. All he talked about was farming. And again, Cal kind of mentioned his dad. Those guys in that era just were pretty humble, hardworking guys, and hopefully that kind of rubbed off on me. And again, if I was in a major league clubhouse my entire childhood, all the way up to 18, I just don't know if I would have learned a lot of the things that I ended up learning from him since he was home. It was kind of the best of both worlds. Real quick, I'll talk because I didn't know Cal and Cal's dad, obviously. And so it's great to learn more about his dad, and Cal and I got to know each other a little later in life, but I knew Bernie from the time I was a little kid, and so a lot of great stories about Bernie. But you mentioned throwing the ball over the fence, and Clay and I reminisce about one time we were playing Legion ball in Cahokia, as it was, and both Bernie and my dad got kicked out of the game. Two young guys in Hawaiian shirts were the two umpires, and they were awful. And I'm pitching, and I can't remember who got kicked out first. Maybe first Bernie, then Dad gets kicked out. And the umps say, okay, game's canceled. You guys don't have any coaches. And I'm standing on pitcher's mound, and when they said the game was canceled, I threw the ball over the right field fence from the pitcher's mound. They had some batting cage or something down there. And I think I had seen somebody do it on This Week in Baseball or something like that, and so it was in my mind that I could maybe do that, and I thought that was the opportunity to show people I could throw it over the fence from pitcher's mound. Then we realized Lon Fulte, who was listed as our third coach, is sitting behind the backstop, and so Bernie and my dad say, no, we've got another coach, it's right here, Lon Fulte. So they decide, okay, the game's going to continue, and the umps say, all right, let's go. And now I don't have a baseball. And so then one of the moms of the Cahokia team is yelling, the pitcher threw the ball over the fence, he should be kicked out, and I'm standing there laughing on the pitcher's mound, but didn't have a ball, so they had to find a couple extra balls for us to throw. And then Mark's dad, so Cal and I are both in the financial business, and Mark's dad and I were both members of the Waterloo Country Club, and he was obviously quite a bit older, but it just so happened.
Obviously.
Well, Howard was. Howard was quite a bit older than me when I joined the country club, and but somehow or another I got put on Howard's golf team, and then Howard and I started playing golf pretty regularly. And to this day, my favorite golfing partner I've ever had. I sincerely mean that. And we got to be pretty close just from playing golf almost weekly. And then he became a client of mine. And so just one of my favorite people in the world. And a quick story about him. One night I had him and Dad, my wife and I decided we wanted to have him and Dad up to dinner. And I don't know if I've ever told you this story.
I've heard about this.
So we decided we're going to have Howard and Dad up for dinner just because they're old friends and old Monroe County guys, and we just wanted to have them up and just shoot the bull with them and talk baseball and talk about the war, because Howard always loved talking about his time in the war and so forth. And I've got a pretty good-sized bar with I think just about anything you could want to drink. And I asked Howard, and I've been with Howard after golf leagues a lot of times, that he would either drink a beer or a Manhattan, usually. Those were the two things, and I thought, well, I can make those. And my dad drank Monroe County martinis, which is half gin, half vodka with a twist. And I thought, I can make them whatever they want. So they come up, and Howard, I say, Howard, what can I make you for a drink? He goes, how about scotch and water? Shit, scotch is the one thing I do not have in this house. It's like I got 50 bottles of stuff and I don't have scotch. So I asked my wife, how long until dinner's ready? She goes, probably about 20 minutes. I said, I can make it up to the liquor store and back. I'll just zip up there. I said, honey, just keep them occupied, chat with them, tell them dinner's coming, whatever. So I go to the liquor store, come back, make Howard a scotch and water, walk out and hand it to him, and he goes, man, the service is slow around here. And I said, Howard, and I didn't say it, but I'm thinking, you don't even know I went to the liquor store to get you scotch, but anyway, I love that guy.
Well, what's funny is, you know, he had that accident in 1975 where he went through the steering wheel with his face and he couldn't taste or smell. You could have slipped in anything of color and he wouldn't have known the difference, and he would have said, "This is the best scotch I've ever had." He wouldn't have known the difference.
Well, he used to always get Manhattans at the country club with one ice cube. And that was his order. I'll do a Manhattan with one ice cube. And I would ask him, because I would watch these other guys. I wasn't a Manhattan drinker at the time, but I was watching these other guys, and the thing was filled with ice and cherry juice. It was kind of this pink color, and his just one single ice cube floating in there. And he said, well, one night I had the Manhattans, it was hot, and I came in and the Manhattans were filled with ice, and I was drinking them like water, and somebody had to drive me home because they were going down so fast I couldn't even taste them. He goes, so now I just do one ice cube so it burns a little when it goes down, and that way I know that I'm drinking and I have to drink it slower.
That's a different story than I heard. He told me he was at my Uncle Chuck's house and my cousin Brent was making drinks, and he kept bringing them drinks and they had ice cubes in it, but he couldn't taste the alcohol and he got too drunk.
Yeah, well,
so it might have happened twice.
Maybe happened twice, but it was the same thing. He said, I can only do one ice cube. That way I taste the alcohol and it burns enough to remind me I can't drink these too fast. But yeah, that, you know, we talked about baseball, and I know this is a baseball thing, but I still remember playing golf with Howard when he was 90 plus years old and shooting 5 or 6 over par at the country club. Yeah, just crazy, but great memories of
I used to invite him to a little, we'd have an 18-hole member guest, not our regular member guest down in Jeff City, and he was in his 80s, like 86, and I went up to the pro and I said, hey, 65 gets the tee in the greens. My dad ought to get the tee in the reds over 80, right? He goes, yeah. Well, after we're done playing, Dad's like, you only invited me to play because you felt sorry for me. I said, Dad, we used your drive on 13 hole. Okay. Well, you didn't use my second shot. Dad, I'm hitting pitching wedges from your drives, and you're hitting 5 irons. We shouldn't be. And oh, Dad, we shot 65, right? You know, he never realized how good a golfer he was.
He is a great golfer.
We had the same clubs. I was playing with him over at Cahokia, and I broke my ankle. Just snapped it off, so I borrowed his. And I was like, Dad, when was the last time you had these clubs re-gripped? He's like, never. I'm like, Dad, I re-grip mine twice a year, and you play twice as much as I do. These are like trying to swing with olive oil on them. I'm not going to play with you again until you get them re-gripped. And like a week later, I said, you get them re-gripped? He goes, yeah, it really makes a difference.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah, as far as my dad, I mean, I've talked a lot about him already, but, and I'm kind of like Cal, the more I would talk about him and how much he influenced me, then I would start to get emotional. But,
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories, we were lucky enough when I got into pro ball, Dad was in pro ball as well. And so it was pretty unique that we were both in pro baseball at the same time, and Dad set his schedule. He was the roving pitching coach for the Reds, and I had just gotten drafted by the Braves, so he set his schedule so that he could be with the Reds team up in the Pioneer League at the same time we were playing. And so he and my mom actually drove out there, which seems crazy right now, but they drove out to Billings, Montana, and so I hit a home run in like the first or second inning, and of course Dad's in the other dugout. He's the roving pitching coach in there, helping that pitching coach, and so I hit a home run, and later in the game, it's the bottom of the 8th inning, 2 outs, guy on second, and I'm catching, and I was fairly new to catching, and so the manager and the pitching coach were working with me on calling games and what to do in certain situations. And one of the things they were working with me on was when there's a base open, not just going right after guys, and maybe working around guys, or that kind of thing. So I call first pitch fastball, and this guy gets a base hit to right field. Guy comes around from second, and our right fielder throws a strike, but it takes about a half second longer to get to me than I would have liked, and I catch, And as I'm starting to turn, this guy lays me out. I mean, I had a big red splotch on my Blue Braves helmet, and I end up about 10 feet behind home plate on my back, held onto the ball, but I'm just kind of out laying on my back. And when I kind of open my eyes and get my wits about me, on my left is my trainer and my manager, and on my right is Dad. The dad's in a different uniform, and I'm kind of out of it. And my first thought that came to my mind was the manager was going to be mad because I called a fastball and we didn't work around the guy like they had been teaching me. And so the first thing I said was, his name was Steve. I said, Steve, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called a fastball. I know base is open. And he's like, it's okay, are you all right? Are you all right? And then the trainer kind of steps in and said, Brad, are you okay? Do you know where you're at? And I thought for a second, and I was like, yeah, I'm in freaking Billings, Montana. And the trainer looks over at my dad, who's on the other side of me, and says, Mr. Rippelmeyer, I think he's going to be okay. And I ended up crossing paths with Dad several times when I was in the minor leagues, both as a player and a coach, where he was in the other dugout, and pretty unique. I know around here, plenty of people following their dad's footsteps, whether it's, going to teaching or take over the family farm. So it's not unique to following your parents' footsteps, but for both of us to be in pro baseball at the same time and cross paths on several occasions and be in the same dugout. I have pictures of he and I holding my twin girls, and he's on the field and he's in one uniform and I'm in the other, and some of those memories are pretty special.
That is cool. That is really cool.
And like Cal said, not a day goes by when I don't miss him. So.
Yeah. I can remember Dad taking me out to the country club, and if somebody did this now, they'd get shot or arrested for child abuse. But he'd get a number one tee, and I'd get out in the fairway with a glove, and he'd hit 5 irons, 160 yards in the air, and I'm catching them. Somebody did it now, they get arrested. What did he just hit? Well, catch the ball.
Yeah, things were different back then as far as what you were allowed to do. Yeah, good stuff.